So far, I found the seafaring and exploration to be more difficult than the city building in Corsair Cove. If my drifters are unhappy, I can usually fix it with some housing or a production building. But 7 Seas events can be tricky. Going in with the wrong ship means almost certain failure. Using the right ship, but not crewing it properly, you guessed it, you're probably going to fail. What about if you have the wrong captain? Well, most of the time you'll be okay, but yes, you could also fail. And so, in today's video, I'm going to go over the best ships for the early game, how to transition into the mid-game by obtaining raid goods, some of the best captains I've encountered, and how to combine all of this knowledge to have an easier time on the 7 Seas, including the ability to take out events not made for your ship's specialization, or events that are 1 tier higher than your current vessel. One of the first things you do in the early game is choose which Tier 2 ship to build first. This is going to depend on the victory path you intend to pursue. Each ship type is specialized for one of the principal victory paths. For example, the Moonlight is a Tier 2 Prowler, specialized for the Notoriety path. That's why it's green, and also why it has such high maneuverability. Meanwhile, Empire ships are red, Seafaring ships are blue, and Wealth ships are purple. There are cases where a ship's stats are good enough that it can do events intended for other classes, but generally speaking, if you want the best chance of success, match the color. If you don't have a specific victory path that you'd like to pursue, a good default is to go with Wealth, and that means completing 3 deeds on the Wealth path. The first is 3 efficient routes to your galley. I have 2 campfires above, 1 campfire below. Deed complete. A second very easy deed is plundering 1 treasure cave. This can be done using the Tier 1 treasure cave event near your starting island. And then last up, I like to build warehouses. And so that done, you could build a shark tooth. Here's the thing. There are Tier 2 plus ships, which have better stats than their base versions. Let's compare quickly. The shark tooth has 82 health, 2 in all stats, and 13 boarding damage. Also it carries 24 supplies. The Gold Seeker, which is a Tier 2 plus ship, 88 health, which is a little more, carries a little more supply, still 13 boarding damage, so the primary stat's the same, but it has much better maneuverability, gun damage, speed, and armor. At Tier 2 and 4, there's a plus version. My recommendation is always build the plus version over the regular. And so for the Gold Seeker, that requires 3 in wealth and 3 in notoriety. Perform a smuggling run, that's an easy one. Efficient transport routes to tavern, that's also an easy one. After that, the next easiest is either 100 total pirates or 100 total stew output. If you need extra stew output, the easiest way to do that, build some extra campfires temporarily, hook them up to a warehouse so you get the big production bump, and then you can delete everything afterwards if you don't actually need the stew. If you have a spare gold, instead of deleting, you might want to do something like sell it using a trading post. That way you can turn the unneeded stew into much needed coin. After that, the next thing to do is make a new pirate camp with a pier slot, which I've already done over here. To construct the ship, you need 2 things, rope and planks. You should already have a supply of planks because they're used for construction. Rope is made by harvesting fiber at a fiber deposit, then spinning it with a rope maker. So that, you have the ship, but it won't necessarily have a crew. For that, you either need picaroons, in the case of either a reaver or a destroyer, or scallywags, in the case of a hunter or a prowler. And each of these have a different upkeep resource. For picaroons, you need rum. For scallywags, you need cassava bread. The rum supply chain starts with a sugarcane farm. This needs to be a 1-to-1 ratio with your distilleries, but you also need barrels. These are produced from wood, so I would build a second woodcutter and dedicate it to that. In this case, because I have 4 of them, I'm actually using all hands on deck to boost the production of my cooper. Because by default, a cooper can only supply 3. It produces 12 barrels a minute, and each building uses 4. Each building also uses 4 sugarcane, which is exactly what a sugarcane farm produces. And the total output is 20 rum, meaning I am overproducing compared to what I need. Technically, I only need to make 20 rum per minute here, instead of a 40 that I'm dedicating. but I like building a little bit of extra leeway into my supply chains and storing the extra in a warehouse. Now, if you were to instead build a ship crewed by scallywags, you'd need to start by harvesting salt at a salter. There's a salt deposit here, but you might not have it nearby to wherever your pier slot is. That's something to consider. This pier slot, for example, is much better suited towards picaroons since it has fertile ground, but no access to salt. If you don't have access, you can use a supply chain to carry it across your city. Check out my supply chain guide to learn more about that. You'd need salt from a saltern, then you'd also need cassava root. Now, similar to a cooper, a saltern produces more salt than a single cassava oven can use, but a cassava farm only produces as much as one oven. So the ratio is one farm to one oven, multiple ovens to one saltern. And if you're only crewing a single ship with scallywags, 2 cassava ovens should be plenty. Just be careful of this if you're on higher difficulty settings with higher upkeep costs. But after you've done that, what about your landlubber? Surely you want to upgrade this as well. And absolutely. From my experience, the best thing to do is upgrade it to a destroyer class, specifically the Steel Edge. See, over time, the Crown's going to attack your pirate haven, and one of the best ways to defend against those attacks is send a ship out to intercept and sink the Crown vessel. This will also allow you to do things like raid Crown ports for resources, which can be handy. If, for example, I needed wheat to make hardtack, I'd need to raid a Crown port in Buccaneer's End. Similarly, if I need tobacco, a quite valuable upkeep resource that can only be obtained by raiding, I'd need to hit this Crown port, and my Gold Seeker is not going to be the ship for the job. So to unlock that, you need 3 points in Empire and 3 points in Seafaring. You'll get 1 point in Seafaring by ambushing the Tier 1 merchant ship. You'll get another point by completing the Drifters, Jetsam, and Shipwreck. And you'll get a 3rd point by having 2 ships. That's why you build the ship associated with your victory path before you build the destroyer. So you have 3 points in Seafaring all taken care of. Also, if you planned to build a seafaring vessel, that's how you'd do it. Then to get the Empire points, you can get 1 from pillaging a Crown port, and the rest from spamming pirate camps. You can place pirate camps all around in different locations, till you have enough of them to fulfill the deed requirements. Connect them, it'll take some planks, and then, after you've fulfilled the deed and turned it in, just delete them all because you don't need them currently. So that done, you can go to your landlubber and upgrade it to a Steel Edge. And in this case, because I have both the Gold Seeker and the Steel Edge, it's going to be very easy to crew, because it's crewed by picaroons. And this is why I have 4 total distilleries. I have enough to provide rum to the Gold Seeker, and enough to send rum from here up to this warehouse, from this warehouse to this warehouse, and from this warehouse over to the tavern. I've got myself some happy picaroons and a fully crewed destroyer. As an important note, while you can crew these ships with swabbies, picaroons increase the ship's base stats, doubling them when the ship is fully crewed. Swabbies do not, making them far less effective. So, whenever possible, avoid using swabbies to crew your ships. This is true both in the early game and all the way through the late game. With that, only one question remains. Who should captain your ship? And this depends on what type of ship it is and what you're doing. So at the start of the game, you have 4 captains: Teach, Kanja, Scarlet, and Honorata. Each of them is associated with a different storyline. So Teach is associated with the Empire storyline. And because of his Hatred is Power that boosts gun damage and health, he's quite good at direct combat confrontations like you will need on Empire missions. His ability, Easy as Murder, starts off pretty helpful when you have a low-tier ship. Later on with higher-tier ships, a single dice isn't that effective. But if you're dealing direct damage to opponent health anyway, it's not bad. Then there's Kanja. He gives speed and supplies. Since supplies are an early game constraint, he's a good choice if you're trying to complete seafaring missions that are often reliant on speed. His ability, All or Nothing, gives a huge boost to dice pools, which can be useful in negotiation events like Parlay, where you're primarily reliant on your dice. Story-wise, he is associated with the Wealth Path. Then there's Scarlet, who story-wise is associated with notoriety. Stat-wise, you're going to want to use her for wealth missions, thanks to her boost to boarding damage. Personally, I find her ability Rise Up Mateys to be a little bit less effective. It gives +1 to the dice pool for the rest of an objective. The problem with this is most events have multiple objectives, so it's not that impactful from my experience. Then there's Honorata, who's associated with the Seafaring path, and her stats are excellent for both seafaring and notoriety, because her perk gives a boost to both speed and maneuverability. No Risk No Fun is also excellent. Gain additional supplies based on dice outcome, so this is a good way to sustain it on long grindy events. And taking double damage to crew only applies if the enemy is trying to damage your crew, so just don't use it when the enemy's trying to do that. Now, if you complete the first story in the Wealth path, you'll gain access to Raven. He has maneuverability, and he doubles the baseline coin that you get. So, if you are specifically raiding for coin, I recommend swapping to him. Then Enrique is one of the riskier raiders to use early game. Late game, when you have like a tier 4, 5, or 6 ship, it's not too bad to take a penalty to speed and maneuverability if those stats are not required for the raid that you're conducting. And he is a good way to get additional tobacco, say on a destroyer ship. Taking a look at this mission, the recommended stats are gun damage and armor, so a penalty to speed and maneuverability isn't going to significantly impact a ship's performance, but gaining 3,000 tobacco is going to be a welcome increase instead of a 1,500 that you'd normally get. And that's where Enrique excels. Then there's Timothy, unlocked through the notoriety path. His Legends luck is, well, exactly that. Really good if you're lucky. Otherwise, I'm not a big fan of it, especially because I don't like the crew loss inflicted by Burning Phoenix until the very late game, where those crew members can be resurrected using an Ocean Coliseum. Last but not least, Charlie Legrand, an excellent captain with a huge boost to speed and maneuverability. Tide Turner is decent. In anything reliant on dice rolls, it allows you to tip the odds in your favor by giving yourself an extra dice and costing the opponent a dice. So, for example, in negotiations, if the opponent is trying to punish you if you gain too much advantage, you can go ahead and pop this, setting yourself up for success next turn. Alright, here's a mid-game version of my pirate colony. I have 4 fully functional and crewed ships, all of which are T4+. So let's take a look at their stats to find out why. A Prowler's main stat is maneuverability, which is 33 for the Rogue. It is still 33 for the Vulture. However, all of the secondary stats, things like gun damage, speed, and armor, are significantly better on the Prowler Plus, meaning it's a more capable vessel, especially when you have to engage in direct combat. For an example of what I mean, here my Prowler was intercepted by a Crown Patrol, reliant on gun damage and armor. Here we go, the Crown's trying to prevent damage, I'm going to blast him, took him out in one shot. So, far less resources are wasted when you have a more efficient ship, such as the Vulture, which is a Prowler Plus. Do you have to build one of each like I have? No, that makes your supply lines far more intricate, and unless your goal is to complete the entire map, there's not really that much of a benefit. But you may have to build more than just one, because let's say I want to pursue the Wealth Victory path. This means that I need to employ Crow's Eyes and Navigators for my Tier 4+ ship. And Navigators require tattoo ink and wine. Wine being a raid good. This can be found in places like the Crossbone Keys, which requires a smuggling run, though I'd only get 1,500 wine. Alternatively, if I wanted to gather more wine at once, I'd need to do a merchant ship event here. This gives 5,000, which is way more, but you'll notice the stats are such that a Tier 4 Reaver is going to struggle because it's balanced for a Tier 4 Hunter, such as the Cat Shark, which luckily also requires wine, so that should be very easy to supply simply by raiding for it and then splitting it between this port and whatever port where I have my Bedlam. Now the Tier 4+ Destroyer, the Ravager, is crewed by Buccaneers and Bombardiers. Bombardiers do not require raid resources. Buccaneers require tobacco. This can be obtained by raiding the Crown Port in the Ancient Archipelago. which is perfectly suitable for a destroyer. Additionally, there's a treasure cave in the Blackwater, which gives significantly more. But since this is a tier 3 event and it only requires 14 boarding damage, you'll note that I have plenty of boarding damage for the task, because again, fully crewing the ship doubles its base stats. Now, as a quick note, if you're having trouble getting raid goods, particularly if you have spare coin, you can invest in a Bounty Hunters Guild Hall. This allows you to hire mercenaries to trade for raid goods without actually going to raid. This might be something like a rookie mercenary who can get you 200 tobacco, 200 wine, or 200 lenses for 50 coins each, or a skilled mercenary who can get you 200 grain, 75 silver, or 200 blubber, again for 50 coins each. Just keep in mind this is rather pricey. And so while I'd recommend this in a pinch, especially if you've already run out of resources and need them right now, in general, I would still prioritize raiding, because the raid events, offering up to 5,000, which you can then double with a captain, is just way more time and resource efficient. But remember how I said my Ravager could do a tier 3 treasure cave? Let's see how that plays out. And of course, the ship is piloted by Enrique for the additional tobacco bonus. And this is a good time to talk a little bit about combat and how ship stats can be important, because I'm using a ship that is not specialized for this. But it's not going to be too bad, because most of these events require dice rolls rather than ship stats. So to start with, I'm going to do Hidden Allies. This lets me roll 5, which again is important because it's dice rolls, not ship stats, that matter here. I'm going to prevent damage to crew and gain charts. Then the opponent is trying to gain more dice, so I might as well gain charts and gain dice for next turn, which will pass me to the next objective, Demoralize. The first event was dice rolls. The second event does rely on stats, particularly armor for preventing damage to your crew and boarding damage. Because I have high armor, this ship is totally fine for this event. I mostly want to minimize the crew damage that I take. For example, the makeshift cover prevents 19 to 24, armor plus dice roll, whereas my blunderbuss deals 75 to 91, because it's based off of my gun damage, which I have excess of because I'm using a destroyer. Then the third event, Investigate, gather hints, it's back to dice rolls. My recommendation here is try to minimize crew damage, but also be careful because it will try to drain your supplies. If you're running low, you might want to take a little bit of crew damage and use something like Clever Search to conclude the event as quickly as possible. But since I rolled fairly well with Captain's Theory, I'm just going to go ahead and use Clever Search. This will conclude the event, ending in a victory. And there we go, 10,000 tobacco earned, 5,000 base, 5,000 from using a captain with the bonus. This is why in the mid-game, it's important to swap your captain around based on what the ship is doing, rather than just sticking to one captain per ship. So now I want to give an example of how an event looks when it all comes together. You have a strong ship, with a great crew, a fine captain, and you've grabbed some sea legs buffs by completing other missions. That's right, I'm going to use my Cat Shark, a tier 4 plus ship, to complete this tier 5 quest that requires 39 gun damage, which as you'll notice, I don't have. The first goal, cover 13,500 meters of distance. This primarily tests the ship's speed, and I've got plenty of that thanks to my captain choice. And since I'm in no danger, I might as well use Crowd on the Sail to save myself a couple of supplies. Now the enemy's trying to do some damage to my crew, so I will hold fast to prevent as much as possible. If they max roll, they might do a little bit, but that's fine, I have plenty of spare drifters. Now a bit of damage to health. I could do Ride the Swell, or I could take a bit of damage and reduce opponent's stats, making the rest of the encounter easier. Even just looking at this, the barrel mines are based off enemy speed, so lowering that means they prevent less of my distance gain. The damage is based off of their gun damage, so if I lower that, and since that's a lower stat, it's going to be more vulnerable to hook shots. For the small cost of a little bit of ship health, I'm going to set myself up to be in a much better position later. Now we're dealing damage to crew again, but this time they can't do any serious damage as they don't have extra dice rolls and their stats are lower. They're going back to barrel mines. At this point, I could easily prevent all the damage, but I'm going to nerf their stats even more. There we go. Because I lowered the enemy's stats so much in the prior objective, now it's going to be incredibly easy to take the ship out. All I have to do is deal some damage. So far, I haven't rolled anything close to getting through the prevention from my heavy fire. This is because my armor is way higher than their gun damage after I lowered it twice. Now all that's left to do is kill the enemy crew. This is reliant on either my speed stat or my armor stat to prevent damage, and then my boarding damage stat to kill enemy crew, which is another reason why having the tier 2 and 4 plus ships can be so nice, as they tend to have more well-rounded stats. It's also why you want to fully crew them to double the base, and why you might want to put a different captain on the ship if you happen to know the event requires a different outcome. I.e. here, instead of focusing on speed and maneuverability, if I was really worried about my gun damage, I could have swapped to Teach. That way, the extra gun damage boost provided by his Powered by Hatred might have been able to get me through. So, Hook, Line, and Sinker kills a good chunk of the crew. They're preventing damage, that's not going to do anything. And one more Hook, Line, and Sinker should take them to Davy Jones' locker. So that's just one example of how you can use a tier 4 ship to complete tier 5 events. Generally speaking, +1 tier is fine, especially 2+ doing 3, 4+ doing 5. I wouldn't recommend trying it with the tier 6 stuff though, as that's a bit of a bigger jump. Alright, now for the fun part. A few tips and tricks. The first of which is, unlock and build an Ocean Coliseum as soon as possible. This resurrects lost crew. So normally, if all of your crew is depleted in combat, you lose the ship. With this, you fail the event, but you can immediately retry it, there's no penalty, and the ship isn't lost, plus all of your lost crew, they instantly respawn. And tip number 2, when it comes to both your ships and your city, you should rebuild and swap as needed. You don't need one of each ship. It's far easier to pursue a single victory path, start to finish, and then rebuild as needed. But just because you start on, say, the wealth path, doesn't mean you couldn't swap to notoriety instead. In addition to the Ocean Coliseum, another very important building is found at the end of a seafaring tree, that being the Great Lighthouse. This halves all upkeep costs for all of your crew, which is especially important to reduce the spend on raid goods like tobacco. Now, a couple more principal buildings worth highlighting include the Shipwrights Guild Hall. This multiplicatively reduces the cost of ship construction and repair by 50%. So, 50%, 75%, 87.5%. You can get things pretty darn cheap, but it'll never quite reach free. In addition, there's the Shrine of the Sea. This is what allows you to accumulate the Sea Legs buff, which might allow your ships to take on a higher tier event. Similarly, the Voodoo Shack curses the opponent's dice so that they only roll once. Very handy if you're a little bit outmatched. Once you reach tier 5 and 6 ships, you unlock Marauders and Renegades, which means you're going to have to deal with new types of raid goods, such as raiding for wheat so you can make hardtack with a tack oven. But located far up here in each of the trees is a resource bypass. So instead of having to collect so many raid goods, you can instead use more common resources, i.e. the Provisioner lets you use cassava bread and herbs to make hardtack. Similarly, the Tinkerer turns tools and lime into spyglasses. The Coppersmith lets you make copper lamps without whale blubber. And the Master Shipwright lets you trick people into thinking that your common steel is in fact a silver lining. Last up, keep an eye out for more captains to join your city. For example, Aqua, who increases silver, pretty good since it's a very rare raid good that is needed for things like the Ocean Coliseum and the Lighthouse, and she has a pretty solid ability, forcing the opponent to roll 1s while you can roll all 6s. There's also Audenzia, with a huge coin bonus and boarding damage, sort of making her a better Scarlet. And yes, if you try hard enough, you can even get Amara to join up. I guess she's not so loyal to the crown after all. Oh, and if you look hard enough, there might be one more very secret captain that you can recruit, but I'll leave that for you to find. P.S. He's awesome. Alright, that's about everything I know about the ships, crews, and captains in Corsair Cove. Initially, I did struggle a bit with combat, especially as I started to do the higher tier missions. But now I feel a lot more comfortable with it. And, especially using tier 2 plus or tier 4 plus ships, you can take on a lot of missions that are one tier higher than your ship. Maybe not all, some of them have stricter requirements than others. Check your stats, but if your stats are close, yeah, you're probably going to be okay. And having a powerful navy really does make it a lot easier to do the city building aspect. At least if I'm able to provide for the upkeep, because there have been several times where I actually got into serious trouble because I didn't do that. But remember, have a backup building where you can buy some upkeep resources. With that said, if you have any questions about ships, crews, or captains, leave them down below. There's a good chance you'll get an answer from either me or someone else in the community. And if you're looking for something else to watch, I have a few other guides on Corsair Cove, including how to set up supply chains, tips and tricks, and a beginner's guide to help you get started with a little bit more handholding. Those will all be up in the card and down below. For now, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.